Welcome to All the F Words,
a podcast where two writer friends, nearly 30 years apart, explore everything we give an F about. I'm Gabby Moskowitz.
And I'm Joanne Greene. On each episode of All the F Words, we focus on a theme starting with the letter F. Things like Fantasia, Follicles, and Faust.
We'll share stories from our lives and our distinct generational perspectives and look to experts for insights and ideas.
Today we're talking about the expression, fake it till you make it, an aphorism commonly understood to mean that by imitating conviction, competence, and optimism, a person can realize those qualities in their real life.
It's a psychological tool that was a whole lot more controversial than I expected it to be when I first suggested we record this episode. I figured we'd just share some stories about times when we didn't feel like we had all the tools to accomplish something and so then had to fudge our expertise a little or something like that and then call it a day.
Turns out it's a little more complicated than that.
Isn't it always? So, as you said, fake it till you make it is an expression. It suggests that by imitating conviction, competence, and optimism, or really imitating anything, a person can realize those qualities in their real life and then achieve the results that they seek. So,
or perhaps no one will notice.
Right, exactly. Exactly. It's not lying exactly. It's embodying. I think that's the way that it's sort of positioned. And it's a really old concept. It's something that people have been talking about for a very long time. And I'm going to give you a few examples, and then I want to talk about the way that it has shown up in your life, and I'll talk about how it's shown up in mine. So I found this quote from a writer, from William James, who's a philosopher and psychologist, who in 1922 wrote in The Gospel of Relaxation.
Ooh, I need to read that. I can just tell by the title.
Yes, seriously. Well, listen to the quote and tell me what you think. I don't know if this is exactly your speed, but so it says, action seems to follow feeling, but really action and feeling go together. And by regulating the action, which is under the more direct control of the will, we can indirectly regulate the feeling, which is not. Thus, the sovereign voluntary path to cheerfulness, if our spontaneous cheerfulness be lost, is to sit up cheerfully, look round cheerfully, and act and speak as if cheerfulness were already there. So, in other words, just turn it off. If such conduct does not make you soon feel cheerful, nothing else on the occasion can. So to feel brave, act as if we were brave. Use all our will to that end, and a courage fit will very likely replace the fit of fear.
So this is a very, very interesting concept. Many religions are based on faith. Judaism, as you know, Gabby, absolutely is built around the belief in God, but you don't have to believe in God to be Jewish. And
Right.
You have to do certain things. It's all about what you do. So the doing, the action ultimately should, in many cases, or maybe even in most cases, lead to faith.
Right.
But whereas in other religions, it's about the faith, less about what you do. So I think this is a really interesting concept. Act happy, and you might just find yourself happy.
Have you seen the Book of Mormon, the Broadway show?
Absolutely. Hysterical.
So the first thing I thought about was the song Turn It Off. You remember? Like a light switch. And it's all about like just shoving those feelings down. I understand that this writer is saying project happiness and you'll have it. It's like that trick. Have you ever heard of that trick where you put a pen or pencil in your mouth and it forces you to smile, and supposedly before long you actually feel like smiling?
No, but I thought you were going to say the one about how you put the pencil underneath your breast to see if you actually need to wear a bra. But I digress. No, like this makes a lot of sense to me because I've been talking about this a lot lately in connection with my book by accident. this idea that we are always programming our brains. We are always giving ourselves messages. So often it's, you're not good enough. You have no idea what you're doing in this situation, which then leads to faking it till you make it often. But you could also say to yourself, you've got this. We've got this. I can do this. And it makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And I think neuroplasticity is such an important point here. The idea that your brain, neuroplasticity is a lifelong thing. Your entire life, your brain can shift. The idea that you can't teach an old dog new tricks is just totally false. It is very possible to shift and change one's brain. And this brings me to one of the I think most interesting examples of fake it till you make it certainly in our, it's a little old, but in our present time, it's definitely something that people are still talking about. Are you familiar with, have you read or heard of the book, The Secret?
Yes, I've heard of it, but I have not read it.
Okay, it's super interesting. I have not read it. People love it. It is written by this woman named Rhonda Byrne. She is Australian, and it takes this idea that you can sort of project happiness and feel happy, and kind of expands on it into, basically it's about the law of attraction, which says if you act as if you already have something, or simply act as if, you can manifest anything you want. So she introduces a notion originally popularized by this woman named Madame Blavatsky. She was a Russian mystic, and a Protestant minister named Norman Vincent Peale. And the idea is
heard of him.
Thinking things will make them appear in your life. So she provides examples of historical people who have allegedly achieved this, and she has a 3-step process, which is ask, believe, receive. And so here's a quote from The Secret. How do you get yourself to a point of believing? Start make-believing. Be a child and make-believe. Act as if you already have it. As you make-believe, you will begin to believe you have received. So when I read that and when I think about it, it's very easy, my ego, my judgmental self, very easy for me to go, what a bunch of hooey. That is so silly and so narrow-minded. But I think that if maybe I'm a little bit less literal about what she's saying, I think it's a really nice concept. And it's definitely something that I, as a creative professional, have employed. The idea of sort of embodying, when I will get into some ways that not feeling as if I have things under control have come up for me later on in the episode. But sometimes when you just feel totally out of your depth, or when you just want something so badly and you see no path to it, sometimes a little bit of making believe can be really effective in my experience. What do you think?
Well, here's the thing. I think yes, and is what I would say. And I definitely had my skeptical face on when you were reading that quote. I think that when we are not confident, we project a lack of confidence. Mm-hmm. So if we're unsure about the job that we're doing, other people are going to pick that up. They're going to sniff it a mile away, and they're going to question whether you have the chops or not. So to a certain degree, I think projecting an air of I've got this actually does get you there a little bit more quickly, because it engenders confidence in those around you. So I think there's just some data that would prove that. I'm imagining.
Do you know anything about manifesting? The work of manifesting?
A little.
Okay. Well, I learned a lot about it. It's actually something that I've been hearing about a fair amount. I've seen it on social media. And there is this author, her name's Gabrielle Bernstein. She's a writer and speaker on modern spirituality. She wrote a book called Super Attractor. She's written, I think, 9 books. Super Attractor, and another one called The Universe Has Your Back. And she has a piece on her website that says, what is manifesting? It is cultivating the experience of what it is you want to feel, and then living and believing in that experience so that you can allow it to come into form, which to me is a little bit more approachable than, believing yourself into a literal thing. Thinking about how you want to feel and learning to project that feeling, I think that feels more approachable to me.
Absolutely. This idea that you can want something, and then if you just think about it and believe it, then it's going to happen. I mean, obviously, we know in life that's not always true. When someone is ill and we want them to get better, we can pray our hearts out about it, and it doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Right.
So I think we have to look at this with some kind of a grain of salt. I think there's also danger in faking it till you make it. Depending on what you're doing. And obviously, if you're doing brain surgery, you don't want to fake it till you make it.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that are actually dangerous, and you want the person to be as absolutely skilled as he or she can be.
An area where what you're saying exactly is a problem often is in the professional world, in business. Now, certainly, there have been stories of people truly, literally faking medical knowledge. There's a story. There's a great podcast on Wondery. I can't remember what it's called, but we'll look it up and I'll put it in the show notes. Of a terrible doctor, this guy who I don't think he even graduated from medical school, and he scammed his way as a spine doctor and killed a bunch of people. But that's not the most common thing. But what we have been seeing a fair amount of lately is actually something that you and I talked about on a previous episode we did on fraud, which is scammers. People like Anna Delvey, Elizabeth Holmes, who faked it so well, embodied success so well, embodied confidence so well that in the case of Elizabeth Holmes, many lives were lost and a lot of money was lost and a lot of people were hurt. So it's a tricky area when it comes to I think it's a concept that can easily be taken out of context. So when used literally, it can become really problematic. In a more practical, let's assume that most of us are not looking to scam billionaires out of, or to defraud anybody. When you bite off more than you can chew in a professional or really any situation, and become therefore afraid, I think when it gets in the way of people being afraid to ask for help, that's when it can become a problem.
No doubt, because you have to know when your actions can adversely impact outcomes. That's for certain. And I think that to some degree, this is okay to do if you are at the same time learning as absolutely much as you can, so that in a short period of time, you will no longer have the need to fake it.
Well, there's an interesting, one thing that kept occurring to me is that the people who need to fake things to make them, especially in a professional context, I would imagine that it varies from between men and women. So men who, we all live in a patriarchy, men grow up in a patriarchy, and often many of them will have sort of a built-in expectation about how life is going to go. And then in a professional environment may have more natural, I'm obviously generalizing, not talking about anybody specific, but in in a professional environment may have more natural confidence because of the way the world has treated them. If you're a woman, especially if you're a woman in a predominantly male dominated industry, I could imagine faking it till you make it becoming kind of in terms of confidence, like an act of survival.
I'm sure that for many women and non-binary people and LGBTQ people and people of color in different situations, there is that sense of being an imposter.
Yeah.
And fake it till you make it is very much connected to the idea of imposter syndrome. I've certainly felt it. I don't know anyone who hasn't in one situation or another, because we stretch just a little bit. Our resumes are definitely depictions of what we've done and what we've accomplished, but there's a little bit of stretching here and there that
Sure.
goes through.
So on the subject of imposter, feeling like an imposter, I took a look at a PDF that you sent me. And I believe her name is Ruth, but she uses Rachel professionally.
Yes.
I want to make sure.
Yes. Rachel Davis, the artist.
Got it. Who is also a psychologist. And so she did some work on what she calls imposter phenomenon, because technically it's not a syndrome. And her reason for that is that she doesn't want to give it any more oxygen than it deserves. It's neither a syndrome nor a diagnosis, and both of those imply something pathological and fixed. So here's basically what it is: feeling like a fraud, being worried that you'll be exposed for being a fraud, and number 3, which I think is really important, being worried that that exposure will cost you and diminish your social standing in your chosen group, or even that you'll be thrown out of your group altogether.
The worst.
Exactly. So you had said before that you have experienced imposter phenomenon. I have too. I'd love to hear if you could share an example of what that was like. Oh.
Yeah. In 2008 or 9, I took a job as director of the Center for Jewish Life at the Marin JCC. And there were a few things that I was not overly familiar with. One was working on a PC, because I'd always worked on Macs. And the other was, I said I was familiar with doing budgets, but I hadn't actually done a budget on Excel. And one of the first things that I was asked to do was create a budget. And I was just, I needed help. There's no question. And initially, even when I remember when I started working there, I didn't know anything about their systems. There's always a major learning curve when you start a new job. But for instance, there was a way to print documents from everybody's office to a central place. I didn't know how to do that. My stuff wasn't set up properly. People didn't have time to help train me or even answer my questions. So I just kept feeling more and more, and this is something our older listeners will relate to, like I just couldn't keep up. I was in my 50s when I took that job, at late 50s, and I was like, oh my God, maybe I'm too old to start a new job and learn all the things I have to learn to be successful here. Now, as it turned out, that was not true. I learned it. I did fine. We move on. But that feeling of, oh no, everybody knows something and I don't know it. And how am I ever going to learn it and feel fully competent? That really haunted me at the beginning of that job.
I really get that. You're so right.
What about you?
I just wanted to say the beginning of every job that I've ever had, just the, nothing being not knowing where anything is literally and figuratively is so disorienting that it can make you feel imposter phenomenon, even if you absolutely do know what you're doing.
Right. There's this incompetence factor. And also, you have to learn the culture of any new place. And that takes a while. I mean, in some places, it's okay to chat by the water cooler. And in other places, it is not okay.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of empathy for anybody who's starting a new job and has that feeling. And just know that, like so many other things in life, this too shall pass, and you will feel very differently a month or two down the road.
100%. Well, for me, the story that sticks out the most was when I was a couple of years into running my food blog, Broke Ass Gourmet, and it had had a lot of success all at once. My first book had just come out. I think I had already started talking with an agent about the possibility of turning it into a sitcom. And I got invited, the company that ran ads on my website invited me to come to New York to sit on a panel with some other food media companies. All I heard was representatives from other food media companies to talk about different ways to make it in the food blog world. So that's all I knew. And then I found out at the last minute that the whole thing was going to be hosted by Andy Cohen from Bravo. So Joanne is shrugging. Andy Cohen is a very famous, he's a producer, but he's also a host on, there's a show called Watch What Happens Live. I'm not really a Real Housewives fan, but I think he's really funny. He's a memoirist, and he's written a couple of very funny memoirs. So I found that out, and I was like mostly just excited about that, and thought it was sort of tickled that I got to be on a panel that he was going to be not on, but I sort of moderating. And so also on the panel, I got to the hotel where everything was going to be. And also on the panel was the founder of Food 52, which is an incredibly famous food blog. And then one of the publishers of Lucky Peach magazine, which is a great magazine. He's now kind of been Me Too'd. So, maybe I shouldn't have had such bad imposter syndrome, but it was, I really was so new to the game. I was my blog was such a scrappy, self-made, and I don't mean that in the glamorous way. These were big deal people with big deal,
or at least in your perception. And that's all that mattered.
My perception. And we were supposed to talk to a whole bunch of advertising executives about the different ways that we have found success in the food blog world. And I was at least 15 years younger than both of them, and I just felt so out of my depth. And then there's this famous guy interviewing us, and it was so I was so overwhelmed. And what I did was, I guess I probably faked it till I made it. I just sort of dissociated and focused on being as charming as I possibly could, because that was really all that was the only thing that was going to make me feel confident. So that's how it worked out.
After this break, we will talk a little more about faking it till you make it.
When I think about being uncomfortable in the moment and feeling like I need to fake something until I make it, it's definitely something that happens less often now that I'm older. I think in my 20s in particular, it was like in my teens, I was a little more comfortable sort of doing and saying whatever. And then I got a lot more self-conscious in my 20s and maybe early 30s. And then eventually, as I've gotten older, feel a little more comfortable just admitting what I don't know, admitting when I'm uncomfortable. But it still comes up from time to time. Where do you stand on that? What's that like for you?
It's so interesting. I think back to what I was doing when I was in my 20s, and I was anchoring the news and deciding what was the news. And I think it took an awful lot of arrogance almost to think I knew enough to make those kinds of judgments. But I think I had that sort of false confidence that comes with youth, and just kind of barreled through. So is this a little different than what you were just saying? But I think as I've gotten older, I've been much more aware of how little I know relative to the amount of knowledge that is out there in the world. So I've become more humble and, but like you say, more willing to share and expose when I think I don't have all the answers. I'm willing to say, yeah, I don't know. I'll get back to you on that, rather than making up an answer.
One thing I always find comforting is to remember that to a certain extent, everything is made up. Most people in many ways are sort of making things up as they go.
Well, that's certainly true for a lot of people. Yeah. Doesn't work in science, doesn't work in Well, in cooking, I guess it does work, right?
Yes, certainly. It's more in savory cooking. There's a little less freedom to make things up as you go along. In baking, baking is science. So,
that's why I don't do it.
But there are ways to, it's like, maybe baking is kind of a perfect metaphor for, or maybe it's more of an analogy for how to embody faking it till you make it in a healthy way. It's like you've got to have a certain amount of structure in order, for example, in order to have a cake that rises. If you want a cake to be a cake, you've got to follow a certain number of things, ratios of, fat to flour to leaveners, etc. But there are areas where you can kind of freestyle. You can make a cinnamon chocolate cake and see if, I don't know, fresh mint would be good in it. I don't think it would be good, but give it a try.
Don't necessarily follow this advice, just in the abstract.
Yes, exactly. But in terms of, but yes, perhaps don't follow that advice literally. But I think that what I want to strive to do is have the primary blocks of knowledge for whatever it is I'm doing as down as I possibly can, and then leave room for the things that I don't necessarily know, and let that be okay, and therefore have enough confidence that I don't seem terrified of doing the wrong thing, because I know for sure about me that feeling like I'm about to mess something up will often lead to me messing something up, even if I'm not actually as out of my depth as I feel like I am.
So overall, and after doing all this research, do you think faking it till you make it is a good thing, a bad thing, an inevitable thing? What would you say?
I think it's a good skill. I think it's a good skill to be able to embody confidence even when you don't have it. But I think that it's also important to feel in that confidence, to be able to admit when you're wrong, when you don't know what you're doing, when you need help, whether it's emotional help or literal help with something that you're trying to do. I think having humility, but also the ability to access your inner confidence is a good idea. I think beyond that, it gets a little iffy.
But always be willing to ask for help.
Yes.
You don't have to act like you know everything. Don't you hate people or I shouldn't say hate people, hate it when people act like they know everything?
Yeah, I do. Because first of all, not only a lot of the times when that happens, not only does the person not actually know, and you feel that the interaction that you're having, it's not only do they not know, are they not able to provide the information that they think they are, but it can sometimes feel like the interaction is about them and not about what you're discussing or about, what it is you need. So yeah.
Absolutely. you all for listening today. And we hope that if you do fake it, that you absolutely make it.
Amen.
Right?
Amen. You can follow us on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at allthefwordspod. And you can also email us at allthefwordspod@gmail.com.
Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye.